Shalom, shalom, everybody. Ariel Bar Tzadok here from the KosherTorah School, found online at www.KosherTorah.com. Hey, we are now going to start a brand new course in classical Kabbalah. We're going to learn a text, a book. It was written in 1559, and it's called Ohel Moed, which means the Tabernacle. And I've taught this book a couple times before in the past, but unfortunately, the copies of those lessons are incomplete, and I have to update them. And rather than work on the old, I said, what the heck? Let's do it from scratch, because the material in this book is classical. Now, I'm going to show it to you here on camera. You'll see it's called the Ancient Writings of the Older Kabbalah. There are three actual books in here. One from the RaMBaN, attributed to RaMBaN, one on Devikut, and our book, Ohel Moed. And this little book of ours covers a lot of Kabbalistic material before it got, shall we say, overly technical. Now, this book is not only pre-Lurianic, before the writings of the Ari and Chaim Vital, it is even pre-Cordoverian. It was written before, well, Moshe Cordovera was alive at the time, but to the best of my knowledge, I don't think his part of this Monim was published yet. Now, this is going to be a wee bit of a history lesson tonight, because I want to explain why I, here at the KosherTorah School, focus on the original and older Kabbalah as opposed to the newer schools. Now, when I say new Kabbalah, I'm talking about the last 500 years. Some of you might interpret new Kabbalah as being like the last 20 or 30 years and refer to the Kabbalah groups and the Kabbalah cults and the like. No, I don't even, deal with that. I go back to the real stuff. Now, remember this. If you were going to ever take a college course and stuff, we've discussed this many a time. What we call today Kabbalah is a form of, an expression of, what we call Jewish mysticism, which developed in and around the 1200s and so. It had its origins, the form that we know today, in southern France and Spain and that area. Much of it was under the influence of Islamic origins, and that is the place and location where these older schools came from. Now, prior to these schools, obviously we had older forms of, quote, Jewish mysticism, which, if you will, were one of the later expressions of the old Merkava Hechalot school. Merkava Hechalot school, that's the continuation of the original school of the prophets, like Ezekiel and Daniel and Merkava, Ascent, and the like. Well, those schools never died. They've always been with us. It is the original source of experiential Kabbalah. Shouldn't use the word Kabbalah in that application. We should call it prophetic experience and leave the word Kabbalah out. And that's going to become important, as you're going to see in a minute. Remember, the word Kabbalah means to receive. Okay? Now, there is reception. Reception is receiving something. Okay, who do you receive from? Well, you could say, I receive from God or the angels. Okay, that's one reception. That's Ruach HaKodesh, or if it was Nebuah, prophecy. But then there's another, and that is reception from a teacher. Kabbalah, as we understand the word, as it again originated and developed in Spain and the like, this was known as an authoritative reception from master to student. So you had the likes of Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, the famous RaMBaN Nachmani, who wrote his famous commentary to the Torah, which is available in every language, I guess. And he's quoting all these Kabbalah secrets. And this was before the publishing of the Zohar. So RaMBaN Nachmani was really the one who established this Kabbalah as an authoritative form of Torah understanding. And of course, one of his famous Talmidim students was Rashba. Rashba was a famous Talmudist. Any student of Gemara studies the commentary of the Rashba to this day. And the Rashba stayed very, very strictly faithful to his Rebbe, the RaMBaN Nachmani, and demanded that all mystical teachings be received from a physical teacher in order to be considered authoritative. And that put him in direct conflict with another guy of the age who says, from a teacher, I receive from God. I receive from the Malachim. I have revelation, not reception. And of course, I'm speaking of Avraham Abulafia. So Abulafia is practicing this older system. Now, he's not the only one to have done this. A contemporary of the day and getting earlier in time, the continuation, the last of the old Hechalot Merkavah traditions, were in Germany. They were a group called the Hasidei Ashkenaz. Now, we have taught that school here prominently because these are the traditions that here at our KosherTorah school we represent, unlike many of my peers who are still teaching that later Kabbalah. So, Rabbi Eliezer of Germiza was one of the famous rabbis of the Hasidei Ashkenaz. And he is the author of many books of what we've taught here, The Way of Angels, The Laws of Metatron, and of course he is the one who brought to us the book of Raziel HaMalach. So yeah, that's good old cool and groovy stuff. But you will recognize how radically different it is from Zohar and the Spanish Kabbalah. Now, we can get really academic here, and maybe for a couple of minutes we really should, because it's important. Because when we want to talk about the Spanish Kabbalah, as it became codified in Zoharic literature, and a lot of what we're going to learn here is Zoharic in origin, actually has its origins outside, not going to like this, outside of Judaism, in what we call Neoplatonic philosophy. Now, when I was originally studying Kabbalah, this is way back in the 1970s. How many of you were around then? Dating myself here. Well, in those days, even before I went to Eretz Yisrael, the only books that were available about Kabbalah in English were things like Gershom Sholem, like Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism, which is still a very good academic text to read. And I always, I was exposed then, of course, to the idea that a lot of these Kabbalistic ideas were what they call this Neoplatonic philosophy. And always, like a bad flavor in my mouth. I would never believe it. I'm a Torah observant, Torah faithful, individual. And if our Torah says that the Zohar is kadosh and comes from Hashem, it comes from Hashem, I don't listen to any of this other stuff. Well, years go by. I have since studied the Sod and the Kabbalah, and I became pretty good at it, I guess. And it got to a point way back in the 90s, after learning this stuff for 20, 25 years, I said, you know what? I'm going to take on these academic scholars of Kabbalah. How dare they say that the Zoharic traditions have connections to, sources in, non-Jewish material? I'm going to prove them wrong. So I went and I studied all of those Greek sources. I actually sat and read Plato. I read his Timaeus and his Critias. I studied these Neoplatonic philosophers like Pliny and Plotinus and these other guys whose names I can't even pronounce. I studied them. You hear my dramatic pause here. And I studied them. Again, in my dramatic pause. And I studied them a third time. Yeah. You know what? Those secular scholars were right. Oh, yeah. The connection between these older philosophies and our Kabbalistic philosophies. Remember when I use the word Kabbalah now? You can't deny the connection. You just can't. Now, from a point of faith, you want to say, well, maybe these non-Jewish sources were tapping into something, or we didn't learn from them. Maybe they learned from us. Whatever. All right, whatever your faith demands of you to believe, believe whatever you want. The point is that we are dealing here with a significant difference between reception and the definition thereof. Are you receiving revelation, or are you receiving a reception from a Rebbe? All right? This is why Avraham Abulafia got into a lot of trouble. The Rashba, again, as I said, Rabbi Shlomo ben Ideret, big rabbi, he came down and put the kibosh on Abulafia's teachings. And it was because of the condemnation of the Rashba that Abulafia's teachings remained unpublished from the 1200s when they were written to the 1990s and early 2000s in modern time. That's a pretty strong influence if you think about it. 700 plus years. So this dichotomy between experience and philosophy is what demarcates, if you will, the older Kabbalah and the new. So when we look towards systems, as every one of us will today, if you are knowledgeable in Hebrew, and if you are a Ben Torah, and if you can go to a yeshiva, you have access to the holy books in Hebrew, and you're going to pick up this book or that book. I'm not talking about the modern cult-based stuff. I'm talking about real traditional sources. You're going to find there are, oh my goodness, I've never bothered to count how many different schools of Kabbalah today. You want to name just a few? Well, based upon the Kabbalah of the Ari, all right, the Lurianic system, you could look at the Lurianic system in the light of Ramchal, all right? You can look at it in the light of Rashash. You can look at it in the light of Hasidut. And you could look at the Hasidut in the light of Breslov, or Lubavitch, or Kamartina, or Ishbitzer, or any of these other schools. I don't think that they're all the same. Oh, no, nay. If anybody has ever studied Breslov or Lubavitch, and you think you're dealing with the same orientation, you got a lot to learn. And this is just from the days of the Ari and Chaim Vital. I didn't even touch on other systems of the Emek HaMelech, the Shari Gan Eden, which are all these different things. And you're going to say, well, so what, Rabbi? Who cares? I just want to know the truth. Well, I know someone very close to me who came to me and confronted me straight and says, I want to know the truth. I said, well, whose truth? Who gets to decide and define what that truth is? You see, when you're talking from this concept of reception from an authoritative rabbi, well, then the one who defines and decides what is reception is the authors of those schools. I'll give an example. You're all very familiar with the Sefer Yetzirah. I teach the Sefer Yetzirah here prominently. I teach the Abulafia system. I teach the Hasidei Ashkenaz. You will see me teach all these things. Whereas, if you are of the school of my original teaching, which was from the school of Rabbi Shalom Sharabi, the Rashash, which is the way of the Sephardic Kabbalists in Jerusalem today, they stay rigidly faithful to the Masorah, the teachings of the Rashash. And what the Rashash taught, they teach. What the Rashash didn't touch, they don't touch. So you are not going to find to this day a Rashash commentary on the Sefer Yetzirah, or a Rashash commentary on the Hasidei Ashkenaz, or a Rashash commentary on Abulafia, or anything else. They didn't touch it. To this day, they still don't. That's just the way it is. And they will give you the impression that the other stuff isn't really the authoritative Kabbalah. Why? Because according to their authority, that is their reception. Now, this is important to understand because you, as a student, you want access to the truth. And you're going to go to the bookstore, whether it be online or in the brick and mortar building, and you're going to find 101 Kabbalah books there. And if you bought them all and you read them all, you're going to walk away completely confused. Okay, there is agreement that there are 10 Sefirot, 10 not 9, 10 not 11. But then there is so much disagreement between one system and the other. And I've just mentioned just a few. I didn't even bother to mention the system of the Gaon of Vilna, which is also a very popular Lurianic system. I could name the system of the Leshem. All right? And there are others as well. Now, these are all philosophical. That's the correct word because they are not active in focus on experience. Now, here's the interesting point. Because when we talk about experience, do you know who was one of the big guys of the experiencers, if you will? None other than Chaim Vital himself. Because when you read Chaim Vital, all right, it's very rare that Chaim Vital is going to quote to you pretty much anything other than like the Tanakh, the Bible, or a Gemara here or there, or the Zohar. That's pretty much all of his sources. Everything else for him was revelation. He claims that he learned everything from his Rebbe, the Arizal. History documents that the two were only together for a period of about a year and a half or so before the Ari died. Boy, oh boy, we have volumes and volumes and volumes of Chaim Vital's work, which he claims comes from the Ari. He got all that in a year and a half or so. That's a lot of stuff. Well, if you read Chaim Vital carefully, he will tell you no. He will say after the Ari passed, that the Ari would come to him in dreams and reveal to him the secret meaning of this as he reviewed this or that lesson. Okay, so now, who is Chaim Vital receiving from? Well, he received authoritatively from the Ari. Yeah, but the Ari was dead. So who was he receiving from? Was he receiving from the Neshama, the spirit of the Ari, his long past master? Was this like the Ari's Jedi ghost coming to instruct him? Or was it an archetype of Rabbi Chaim's psychological mind? Or was it a malach in the guise of the Ari? Your guess is as good as anyone else's, and people have speculated about this. But Chaim Vital was an eclectic kind of guy. Even though, like I said, he worked very clearly with his sources. We have his Sha'arei Kiddusha, of course, which I teach here very prominently, and the third and fourth sections of which are readily available in courses. And I'm right now teaching lesson shorts on parts 1 and 2, which deal with the moralistic prerequisites for prophetic practice. Well, Chaim Vital, the eclectic, crazy Kabbalist that he was, God bless him, it is Sha'arei Kiddusha in part 4. He does something unspeakable. He quotes Abulafia by name and puts in there all kinds of calling upon the 72-letter name with these angels and all kinds of stuff, which don't even have their source in Abulafia. And that material was considered so controversial that the part 4 of the Sha'arei Kiddusha was forbidden to be published until 1990. No one wanted to touch it. If you go look at the original copies of Sha'arei Kiddusha, which are readily available, they're still out there. When it gets to part 4, it has a little paragraph, and then it says, so says the publisher, this part, too deep, too holy, can't touch it, bye. And in the day when I was first exposed to that, I had to go to the universities to get like the handwritten manuscripts and write, out of it with my hand. This is pre-computer days. And luckily now, part 4 is readily available. But this is the way it was. So, this is why I go back to the sources. Because when it comes to real, and again, I won't use that word Kabbalah, I'll use the word Jewish mysticism. It is prophetically based. It was about contact with and interaction with the higher realities around us. Now, you can study Zohar until you are an expert in every word. And there are people who are out there who are. Let me tell you something about the Zohar. If you read and study the Zohar, you will become a brilliant philosopher in Jewish metaphysics. Oh, I love the Zohar. I'm pretty convinced that the scholarly evidence is there to validate that it was written in the 1200s. Whatever Moshe de Leon's connection to it, or his group, whether it was him or a group of people, who knows? I think we could pretty much say with authority that it was not historically connected to or related with Shimon ben Yochai of the 2nd century, even though our legends say so, and that's fine. Legends be legends. But there's something about this Zohar. Where did it come from? You're going to say it came from Shimon bar Yochai. Okay. Let's just, for argument's sake, say that it does. Okay, well, again, when you look at it realistically, we're dealing with something written in the 1200s, 1,000 years after the good Rebbe passed away. So how did that get to be? Remember we talked about revelation? Is it possible that Moshe de Leon and his group indeed practiced prophetic techniques? Whether they be Abulafian or earlier, and therefore had experience with connections to the Tzadikim? And just like Chaim Vital had visions and revelations from the Ari, and whether it was really the Ari or a Malach or an archetype, maybe Moshe de Leon had the exact same thing with Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Because when you read the Zohar, you are reading this. You're going into a whole new world. It's like going into a different reality. It's profound. It's beautiful. So whether or not it's historically connected to the historical Shimon bar Yochai is irrelevant. Rather than just get caught up in the tale and the teachings, which again is metaphysical, very philosophical, very Neoplatonic. Where did it all come from? How did it get there? How did these guys who put this to pen, to stick to quill, where did the words come from? That's the revelation. That is what we're talking about here. That is the older Kabbalah. So when we want to experience things, we got to go back beyond the philosophy, which has become the prominent form today. Now, I know many people. You can go to any Hebrew bookstore. You can go to the ones online. You can go to the ones brick and mortar, whether it be in Jerusalem, New York, or Miami, or anywhere else in the world. And you can find a great number of Kabbalah books. One of the great books that we teach Kabbalah from, of course, is from Chaim Vital, and it's called The Treasury of Life, the Otzrot Haim. Of course, we have our courses on that available through here at KosherTorah School. And you'll find a good dozen or more commentaries on it. And as I've studied these modern commentaries written in the last 20 years or so, it's very frustrating because I've seen people, all they do is quote words that, based upon their own expression of how they're explaining it, they don't get it. They really don't understand even what they're saying. So if I would ask a basic, simple question, what is a sephira? A sephira, yes, there are 10 sephirot, blah, blah, and they just quote. I say, well, what does it mean, what you're saying? And I remember, I've told you guys many a time the story of my own personal experience with Rabbi Meir Levi, my teacher, Lava Shalom, who, when I first left Beth El, And I'd study Shara Kavanot, I studied the Chaim, I studied the Chaim. I had good knowledge. I was there for at least the period of time that Rav Chaim Vital was with the Ari. So I thought I knew my stuff. And in one simple conversation of 5 minutes, Rabbi Meir shot me down. Boom. I had a funny thought in my head, just popped in. I'll tell you a story. I've been a student of martial arts and Chinese martial arts literally since I was a teenager. And even when I was in Israel, I still kept things up. And when I came back from Israel in my 30s, I wanted to study for the first time soft style. And I wanted to study Bagwachuan. It's similar to the dragon style that I'd learned. And the teacher at the school was this fat guy, little short, stubby, fat guy. He just got off the boat from China and insisted that every time we studied the Bagua with him, that he had to give us a class in things like the I Ching and stuff like that in Chinese. It was really lovely. But I remember the first time he wanted to see what I learned. He wanted to see what I knew. And he says, okay, let's spar. I said, fine. All right, no big deal. I was young, I was tough, strong, big, chubby little fat guy. Yeah. I said, how hard is this going to be? Well, we bounced around for about 10 minutes. And as God's my witness, I couldn't lay a hand on him. I couldn't even get close. And he never blocked me with a hand or a fist. He was just bouncing around. It was like trying to hit a ball in the water. He was just bouncing around out of the way. Finally, I got frustrated. I said, what the heck? How come I can't even lay a hand on you? And he taught me subtle little nuances. And again, 5 minutes, which changed everything I'd learned for the past 20. I know what do they call it? Humble pie? Okay. Rebbe Meir taught me humble pie, and Master Chu taught me humble pie. So yeah, I remember these things. Love life. You always, when you think you know something, you learn all anew. That's why here at our KosherTorah school, I'm here to teach you about experience as opposed to just dogma and doctrine. So if you want to learn the dogma and doctrine, fine. Gesundheit, as they say in Yiddish, knock yourself out. You want to learn this school or that school? Great, go for it. But if you want to learn the old school stuff, you see this little t-shirt behind me here? I printed these up. That's angelic writing on them. That's an actual real amulet. And I put them on t-shirts. They're available for donations to our school. You'll see it. Go to our website, and if you're on an email list, you'll get notifications about that. More than happy to give you one of those for the donation, and you'll see all about it. Now, it's a t-shirt, right? I go to t-shirts, I get one at Walmart, right? What makes this one special? That's up to you to decide, isn't it? It's only print on a piece of cotton, right? Or is it more? Let me tell you something. Do you think this has power to it? Yes and no. Right now, that's just a t-shirt behind me. Right? As a matter of fact, I'm wearing one right now. You can't see it. I gotta lift myself up here. Whoop. There you go. Whoop. It'll have power if you activate the power. You make it real. You make it strong. It's not a philosophical concept that you think. It's an experience that becomes real. So, my critique against the later Kabbalah is that it drifted away from the experiential into what we call the philosophical. And in later secular Kabbalah, they divide now the schools of Kabbalah. They call it the prophetic school, the magical school, and the theoretical school. And the theoretical is you're learning a lot of stuff, and it's really cool. It's almost like learning Gemara. That's all well and good. But I know many people have studied Zohar for years, who studied Kitvei HaAri for years, in many different schools. And they come to me frustrated. And they say, Rabbi, we've studied this and that for so many years, you haven't gotten anything. Mamatzata, mapipashta. What have you found? What have you done? That's a quote from the Zohar. It's just nothing. Because it's not so much the study of the Zohar, it's the studying how to Zohar. You never heard the Zohar being used as a verb before, have you? Yes. Ohel Moed. It teaches the old school. And yes, it's going to teach doctrine, teachings, and the like, but it's older. It doesn't personify things. For those of you who've ever studied the Zohar or the Kitvei HaAri, you know we speak about all the different Sefer Partsufim. We have the Zer Anpin, and the Ari Anpin, and Abba, and Imma, and Yaakov, and Rachel, and Leah, and Yisrael Saba, and Tavun. Your head goes around and around. It makes you go nuts. Anyone who reads this stuff and takes it literally would literally tear the books apart and call it a blasphemy. And indeed, you had rabbis who've done exactly that. You had a school coming out of Yemen, the Yemenites, who looked at the Zohar from a Maimonidean point of view. they went ballistic. Like, this is not it. Now, what's the big deal? If you try to understand that material literally, you're going to have big problems with theology and everything else, because none of it's literal. The Ari is not literal. The Zohar is not literal. And anyone who tries to understand these things literally, like I said, you're going to get in big trouble. And unfortunately, most of the people today who try to study this stuff get into that trouble because they just don't get it. So, this is why you need the experiential touch, which is what we offer here at KosherTorah. And I like this book. It's written by a guy named Rabbi Yosef Menahem, 1559, in Egypt. That's pretty much all we know. And it presents the ideas and teachings of the older schools prior to their getting so sophisticated. And the problem that I have with this, in quote, sophistication, is that when we try to put a face upon God, even as Reb Chaim says, l'shekechet ha'ozen, so as to at least help us understand. You see, when Reb Chaim Vital, again, an experiencer, when he is gazing into the Zohar and sees from one end of the world to the other, he's receiving revelations and insight. But how does he describe it? How does he explain it? He's talking about the depths of psychological truths of the human experience. And the only words that he can use to describe it are the words that come out of his Zoharic background. And therefore he uses the language that he understands. Just like Carl Jung, when he's understanding psychology, uses the words that he understands. And everyone, whatever their source, is going to use the language of symbolism that they're familiar with within the context of their historical upbringing. That's just the way it is. So Rabbi Chaim explains things as he does, but we need to understand the symbolic nature thereof. And it gets very, very technical. And most of the time, when we teach Lurianic stuff, we're spending our time unraveling the metaphoric language, which in my opinion this takes too much time. It's too distracting. So we need to focus on other stuff. And that's what I like about Ohel Moed. It covers a whole bunch of good topics. And it explains things very differently from Chaim Vital, sometimes even very differently from the Zohar. This book was written with 4 different sources. One being RaMBaN Nachmani, which remembers the guy who was very strict about having very rigid reception from authoritative sources. Now, why is that so important? Well, if we say that some of Kabbalah borrowed, in quotes there, from Neoplatonism, well, did you ever study? Again, go study Neoplatonism. You're going to find that everything there is kosher. If you've ever tried to break your teeth or your brain reading Aristotle's metaphysics, that's enough to give you a brain hemorrhage. There's stuff in there that are good. There's stuff in there that's bad. And the rabbis want to make sure that you only accept what is kadosh and not what is tameh. Remember the foundation, Amavti ben kodesh l'chol. So that's why our rabbis do not encourage you to go into source material and to read Plotinus and Pliny and all these other guys, all right? You don't need to be studying Plato. You just study what the rabbis have gleaned from there and use in Kedusha. And that's fine. That's fine. That's the reception. That's RaMBaN Nachmani. But you had others as well. You had a very famous commentary to the Torah by a Rabbi Recanati. Again, one of the original sources that quotes the Zohar and therefore validates the Zohar as an authoritative source for understanding the Torah. Remember, just because you have these guys out there who are quoting all this weirdo stuff, that doesn't make it legit. You know how many cults we have today? Jewish cults. This one says, I'm kosher. This one says that one, right? You got them all kinds of weirdo stuff. And you got them here in America. You got them in France. Right, the Rabbanites told me some of these weirdo guys in France. Right, you got them in Israel. You got them all over the place. This one takes a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, makes a nice smorgasbord of weirdo spirituality. They put New Age in there, put Christianity in there. They could put other stuff in there, and you get all this weirdo stuff. What the heck is that? Where did that come from? It comes from the mind of the person who thinks that they got it right. Whatever. Reception. RaMBaN Nachmani. Recanati. There is another old book called Marekhet Elohut. All right? Very, very interesting book. Has a very famous commentary written to it called the Hayat. Very authoritative, original Kabbalistic text. And then Rabbi Yosef Giktalia, the author of the Sha'arei Orah, the Gates of Light. That's, I think, available in English even. Rabbi Yosef Giktalia is an interesting guy, because his Rebbe was none less than Avraham Abulafia. So you have here about 200, 300 years, give or take, from the times of Abulafia, the times of RaMBaN Nachmani, and all these other guys. And here comes Rabbi Yosef Menahem and puts them all together in this sweet little book here. And again, it's a shame that this is not a more popular text. This is called the Older Kabbalah. All right. I think this version that I have here is the first time Ohel Moed was ever actually published. You got so much great stuff out there that's out there in the corners that no one pays attention to, that has so much good material. So I've taught this before. It's got great stuff. You're going to see, we're going to get into like really weird stuff, the old goodies stuff, the experiential stuff, because that's what this class is all about. Now, with that introduction, again, let's sum it all up. The difference between reception via revelation and reception via a rabbi. I received from my rabbis. I had the honor, the merit, and the zchut to sit with the likes of Rav Hadaya, Rav Darzi, Rav Kaduri even. And then I sat with Rebbe Meir Levi. And Rebbe Meir is the one who taught me how to go beyond and experience myself. And this is what I bring down to you. So with that note, I'm going to go right into our text here. This page called Sefer Ohel. You see it right there. I'm going to read to you. Don't know how that looks on camera and stuff. I'm not one of these camera kind of guys. I'm not very sensitive and aware of this modern kind of stuff. I see the videos that some of these other guys make. Oh, it's so professional. Me, all I know is how to press a button on my camera. Yeah, that's all I know. So I'm old school. You know, they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, I guess I'm an old dog. What can I say? Hachtama leve'er chidush ha'olam v'ha'atzilut v'ha'yehud. An introduction to explain what we call here the chidush ha'olam. Chidush is the, I don't know, what should we say? The renewal, the newing. The word comes from chidush, means revelation of the world and its emanation and its yichud, its unity. That's curious to put all the words together. Now, of course, we can go into Rab Chaim Vital and jump right ahead. Well, there was this tzimtzum, there was the order of the Ein Sof, and all that, blah, 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 blah. None of that's here. Let's get simple. All right, remember the famous KISS rule? Keep it simple and straightforward. Okay? That is the real way to receive. So, Al derech Kabbalah b'derech Kitzara. This is the real Kabbalah, the reception, and let's just do it in short, he says. L'karem hadavar el hadat, kafi koach halashon, v'lo Kafi mahut adevarim. And let's make these things, let's bring it close to knowledge and understanding by whatever ability that language can give us, but not necessarily the reality of things. Why not the reality of things? Why does he say here, v'lo kafi mahut hadevarim? Not the reality of things. Why? Well, how many of you are really aware of energy? Tell me. If any of you want to write in text here, what does energy look like? Have you ever really seen it? Touched it? Talked to it? Or you could say, well, lightning bolts, I've seen that. Nah, that's an expression of what is real energy. You can say, well, it's a flow of electrons or photons. When was the last time you saw a photon? When was the last time the photon's floating through the room? You say, hey, Mr. Photon, can you stop? Can I have a chat? Yeah, hey, can you tell me about yourself? If I start talking like that to a scientist, I know a good couple of scientists, right? They're going to roll your eyes. Are you nuts? All right? I got a scientist in our class right here, an MIT guy. He understands this stuff, okay? We're dealing here with our ability to understand higher dimensions. And therefore, like Rabbi Haim says, we have to describe in words to give us some semblance. Semblance of what? You're either going to understand this stuff academically and intellectually, which is very rigid and confined, or you're going to understand it intuitively, artistically, which is more fluid and open. Now do you understand, again, the difference between the old and the new? The new system, very rigid in words, blocks it down like this. The old system, very fluid, like art. So you're either floating like a butterfly, or you're rigid like a rock. All right? I'm not into getting stoned, so I stay away from the rocks. Unless, of course, it's good rock and roll, but that's another story. So, he quotes here a number of different verses from the Torah that only, God understands this stuff. And he says, Lefikach, asul hakur yoter mitai. He says it's forbidden for us to actually investigate too much. Because human intelligence has a boundary and limitation. And how are we going to explore examining the boundaries of that which have no boundaries? How do you understand that which is beyond understanding? Goes into, remember, you talk about Sefer Ohel? We try to narrow things down. All right? How many people just say, cut to the chase, tell me. But I can't. All right? How many of you ever been to a museum and you've seen a wonderful, beautiful painting? All right? Or listened to this wonderful, beautiful music? Or been to a place with wonderful, beautiful scenery? So, I'll give an example. The Rabbanit is actually a lover of beaches. We're in Costa Rica. I went there for business reasons. She went to the beach. She loves the beach. She goes to I can't get her off the beach. That's her meditation spot. All right? If I were to ask her, sum it up, tell me about the beach. What makes it so important? It's beyond words. Because it's not an experience that words can describe. It's beautiful like this, it's beautiful like that. I get it. If you want to describe that wonderful painting that you saw, which, breathtaking, that music, amazing. You can't put it in the words because it's beyond words. So don't try to limit things. Got to expand. You're never going to get into the energy of things by trying to narrow it down, pull the energy out. This is what he's warning us about. And so he quotes here from the Mishnah, Tractate Hagigah. Asur adam lahaker, ulehaher mahu lamala, mar lamata, malifnim ma'achor. It's forbidden for someone to try to investigate and contemplate that which is above, that which is below, or that which is inside or that which is outside. All right? Abal b'mi'ut karova davar el da'at ima emuna yaspik lanu. He says, as much as we don't understand, we have to recognize that we accept this all in faith. she'ikar haTorah netuya al shorash emunah, because the foundation of our Torah is founded, is planted in faith, and the heart of every single one of Israel are called guardians of the faith. All right, and that's really what it boils down to. So, what is this whole thing about faith? All right, I believe. Well, if you believe in a doctrine or a dogma, all right, I believe. Yeah, well, a lot of people believe weirdo stuff, okay? And they don't open up or think anything. Real faith is not blind following. Real faith is to accept the experience that you have as having validity within a context of greater confirmation. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. There are many a time I would study things over the years, and I would read something, and I would have an insight into what this actually meant. And I'd say, that's very interesting. That's an interesting way of looking at things. And I'd write something down, and I'd say, I wonder how valid my insight is that I'm seeing in this or that writing, or this or that thought. And then days, weeks, months, sometimes even years later, I would read something in a brand newly published text, for the first time published, a Balafia, some other source, and I go, that's exactly what I was thinking 10 years ago. Validation. I have faith in these things. Now, many people have faith in whatever they believe, and their experiences will validate whatever they wish. That's true too. But yet, there are times when such types of faith can be misguiding. Get it? So this is why I don't judge when people say this or that, but I say, let's see. Time will tell, and you will see. So when it comes to our cultivating experience, many people will contact me in private consultation. They say, okay, I've had this or that experience. Rabbi, is it real? Is it true? And I respond and say, time will tell. I guess we'll find out. And by you keeping your spiritual diary of your experiences, you yourself will be able to recognize what should be dismissed and what should be embraced. Now, Chidush Ha'olam. It's very important that we recognize the true nature of the revelation of where everything comes from. The rabbi writes, RaMBaN, quoting here the rabbis, quotes here from the Rabbi Eliezer, famous midrash, Kodem shebara Hashem yitbarach et ha'olam, hayahu u'shemo levad, shne'emar ani Hashem hu shemi. Prior to the creation of the world, all that existed was God and His name. That's really weird, that God's name existed beforehand. Mind you, just for an academic point of view, that actually contradicts Rabbi Chaim Vital. See, Rabbi Chaim Vital says in the beginning, there was this Ein Sof and had no name, no nothing. And yet, here, Rabbi Menahem says, oh no, it's God in His name. Now, is this a contradiction? Well, we don't have to get philosophical and debate and argue. We just got to understand what it means. What is the name of God? Did you ever think about it? Oh, yeah, okay, it's Yud Kei Vav Kei. Yeah, we know what the name is. Fine, Mazel Tov. Okay, what does that mean? Why does God have a name? Oh, who else are we going to call Him? Well, if there's only Him, what difference does He make? All right. For example, close your eyes, divest, divorce the whole world, and it's only you. Okay? You have no sight, no sound, no taste, no talk, no nothing. It's just you. All right? You exist. You know you exist. Is it really important that you give yourself a name? Why? Is they like you in the name, so you're talking whether you're schizophrenic? No, of course not. This has meaning, and it's a very profound meaning. Now, I'll take you and give you a little example from Chaim Vital. For those of you who are Torah observant Jews and who pray in a minyan, and you daven daily the Amidah prayer, right? That's the Stei Shmona Esrei. When we have the public recitation and we recite the name of God in a blessing. Baruch atah Hashem chonen ha'da'at, right? Rofei chole amo Yisrael and all the rest. The public, or the community, when you say the name of Hashem, you say Baruch atah Hashem, and people respond Baruch Hu u'Baruch Shemo. Blessed be He, and blessed be His name. Well, why do we say that? Isn't God, why do we have to bless His name and Him? It's like it's two different things. Well, in the language of Chaim Vital, he states that God's essence and God's manifestation are two related, obvious things, but from our human perspective, very different from one another. Now, this is vital for our human experience and understanding. For those of you who have ever studied Chaim Vital, the Otzrot Chaim, the Etz Chaim, and he talks about all these parts of him, and he talks about the Ein Sof, and he talks about Adam Kadmon, and the revelation of lights from the Akodim, and the Nikudim, and the Birodim, and the building of Atzilut, and Biri'ah, and Yetzirah, and Asiyah, and the Partsufim, and all the rest. Where is all that? When is all that? The great revelation and insight. The Baal Shem Tov got it right. It's psychology. It's inside us. What Reb Chaim was able to see through revelation, not reception, was the true essence of the human collective psyche. Oh, he tapped so deep. That's why I love Chaim Vital. I mean, this guy, he hit the nail on the head. He got it. But you gotta understand beyond or through his metaphors to get to the essence of what he means. And this is called the name of God. This is Yud Kei Vav Kei. So when we want to talk about God's name, remember God's name is the ultimate, or the reality of the experience of God that we human beings are capable of experiencing in our present realm of consciousness. And it gets really interesting because, again, Chaim Vital says, when we ascend and evolve in collective consciousness to that time which we call Mashiach, even God's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, is going to change. And it will no longer be Yud Kei Vav Kei. Bayom Hahu Yihyeh. All right? Yud Kei Vav Kei will become Yud Kei Yud Kei. Now, that's only a symbolic metaphor for a revelation of a very profound insight regarding the evolution of human consciousness. So everything that we see right now, everything that we know of the universe, everything that we interact with, whether it be with malachim or shatim, or intergalactic entities, or interdimensional entities, it is all within the context of Yud Kei Vav Kei, our human limitations and boundaries. This is called God's name. But beyond God's name is God's essence. Oh, what the heck is that? I have no idea. And neither do you. And neither does Moshe Rabbeinu. Because this is the underlying teaching from the Torah. When Moses said to God, hey, I want to see your face. Show me. And Hashem said, no one can see my face and live. And yet at the same time, and later, God speaks about Moshe. He says, Moshe and I, we talk like face to face. But he just said you couldn't see the face. Confusing, no? No. Moses could see Yud Kei Vav Kei, but he couldn't see beyond it. Because no human being can in our present limitation of consciousness. So it's important for us to understand, like the rabbi opens up this book that says, hey, we got limits. Which means that ultimately we're going to have questions that are going to just remain unanswered. And we're just going to have to deal with that and have faith in the reality of things. Now this gets very real, especially if you look in the circumstances of the previous century. You had the most overwhelming, crazy, irrational experiences like the Nazi Holocaust. crazy stuff that's going on in the world today. People say, where is God? How come God doesn't answer prayer? What's going on? Good question. I certainly wish that I had the answers to give you. I'm actually writing something about this topic right now, and I'm quoting from Isaiah. Chapter 55, God says, my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. My ways are higher than your ways. Don't expect to understand. All right? We can't. And that's why we need faith. So like I said, many a time I will have a revelation, not from a book, but from an insight. And rather than just run with it and accept it, I mark it down with a question mark. Is this real? I'll have faith in it. And then as time comes by, my faith can be validated, or maybe I'm wrong, invalidated. So the first lesson that we need to learn is a little bit of humble pie. And remember, there's only so much that we have. This is why you have to be fluid with these things. Unlike that mentality, everything has to be rigid. You have to have answers, and it's like this because this rabbi says, and if this rabbi said blah, 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 blah. That whole path, in my opinion, is going in the wrong direction because it's going to give you false faith. In modern times, right now, we have had some crazy times in the last year or so. And you had rabbis out there swearing to Mashiach is coming, and this is going to happen, that's going to happen, and it doesn't. People have such hope and faith in these statements, and then they're proven wrong, and they lose faith. And they don't only turn away from the rabbi, they'll turn away from God and Torah. And that's why that kind of rigidity is very negative and harmful. Just got to go with the flow. You got to be open for this stuff. You got to allow faith to breathe and live. See my t-shirt behind you there? That's an angelic invocation. It will have power because of your faith in it. Not because of the t-shirt, it's just a t-shirt. But you put the power into it, you activate it and make it real. You know who taught me that lesson? Rav Abu Chatzera himself. Baba Sali. When I went to Baba Sali, right? You know, man, I'm a crazy guy. I asked the crazy questions, right? I said, Kavod Harav, how is it that your blessings work? And he goes, Emunah. If you believe, they'll work. And if you don't believe, they don't. Now, just because you believe something doesn't mean it's going to happen. I believe that I'm going to win the $1 billion lottery tomorrow. Mazel tov. Well, if my faith was that strong, if you remember the quote from Yeshu, right? If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you'll tell the mountain to go pick up and move. Okay? Well, if any of you want, I live out here in Smoky Mountains, Tennessee. Be my guest, go out to the mountain, stand there and say, move, 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 move. And if you could pick up and levitate a mountain with your faith, I want to just film it, put it on camera on YouTube here. All right? Love to see it. You know that's not going to happen because that's not what we're doing. That's not real. Real faith is not limited, but it's real. What does that mean? Famous words, Pirkei Avot. Not my will, but thy will be done. Right? Batel ritzonecha lifnei ritzono. Nullify your will before God's will. That is having real faith. And that's why he says, don't try to understand this. It's beyond understanding. All right? God's name and God's essence. All right? There is a higher and lower reality of things. And we discuss this and believe this and we know this is what's real. So, on that note, I've given you what we need for our introduction. So you know now the difference between Old Kabbalah and New, and why here at our KosherTorah school I focus on the old, the prophetic, the experiential. I believe, like the Baal Shem Tov taught, that this is what's desperately necessary for right now. And what we need is individuals to practice, to really help elevate global consciousness, to bring it to a point where what we call the Messiah, the Mashiach, can really happen. Hopefully not through crazy, wild, apocalyptic, doom and gloom stuff. We've had enough of that. But let's see if we can do something positive. Having faith. Because the Gemara says, the Gemara, probably the best book of Jewish mysticism. Tractate Makot. It says, Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the entire Torah, 613 commandments. And the prophet Habakkuk came and summed it up into a single mitzvah. Sadiq emunato yahiyeh. You want to be righteous? The definition of being a righteous person is that you live by this faith that we just described. That's the whole of Torah. And in the wise words of Hillel, like you hear me say all the time, Zeal Gamar. Sierra's behind the thing there. She thinks she's getting up. So if this is about to fall, that's Sierra. I guess it's time to end the class. Practicality. Reality. That's what it's all about. Baruch Adonai L'olam Amen. The magic moving. It's an angel back there. Sierra saying she wants to go out. I'll see you all next time. God's blessings. Shalom.